Come on down. All right. My goal today, my name is Cynthia Paschen. This ground is so uneven. I better just stand in one place or I'll go rolling down the hill like an acorn. This farm, just for your information, was owned by a couple named Oliver and Leota Berg, B-E-R-G. For about 150 years, their family, the Berg family, owned this place. And I had the pleasure of attending Mrs. Berg's funeral and got to meet the three Berg girls, and they told me stories about growing up here. The two oldest girls had a bedroom each upstairs, and the baby had to sleep in the hallway. So they were not wealthy people. They were very respected by the folks in Jewell and in Hamilton County. Anyway, this farm at one time was about 30 acres, and that was at a time when you could have 30 acres and you could do just fine. You could have a few hogs and a couple of dairy cows and big garden, and you could feed 3 children, and your wife wouldn't have to go to work if she didn't want to. She had plenty to do here. So it's a time that we as Iowans mythologize, that we can live on 30 acres and, put up tomatoes and peaches and have enough for your family for the whole winter. And I'm afraid that time, I don't know if it's coming to an end or if it's already ended. Chris will have more insight about that than I do. But I'm running for the Iowa House. I'm running out of Franklin, part of Wright, Northern Story, and all of Hamilton County. And the reason that many of you are here today is not to listen to me pontificate, but to hear our next Secretary of Agriculture, Mr. Chris Jones. Thank you for coming. Got it?
All right, Sid.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, thanks for coming today. And I want to say I've met Cynthia a couple times, and this part of Iowa is fortunate to have a great candidate like her for the legislature. She's got a lot of energy and is an interesting person, and you wish all our candidates for the legislature could have that. And so I'm running for Secretary of Agriculture. I'm the Democratic candidate. I'm originally from Ankeny, down the road. My folks bought their second house, sight unseen in Ankeny in 1967 for $18,000, and there were 6,000 people there. And my mom and my brother and sister are still there. And when I come over here to Central Iowa, I stay at my mom's. But I come into Ankeny now, and I think, what is this, right? It's just so big, and it's bigger than Iowa City now, where I live now. And I think, who would have thought it 50 years ago? And so I'm running primarily on a water quality platform here. In 2012, 2013, we basically made the Secretary of Agriculture responsible for water quality in the state of Iowa with the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. And since that time, the incumbent, Mike Negg, he says he spent $100 million a year on water quality. And so since he's been in office 9 years now, Bill Northey was right before him. He's been in office for 9 years. He spent almost $1 billion on water quality. And I would ask you, does the water look $1 billion better to you? And it sure doesn't to me, right? And so we don't get the water quality that we want. We can't drink the water without having to worry about its condition and whether or not it's a long-term cancer risk. We see down in Des Moines, they've rationed water now 2 summers in a row. We see the state park beaches. We can't go and swim at the state park lakes because, you know, they're posted for E. coli and the toxic algae blooms. And I saw this morning there's 16 of the state park beaches that are posted for no swimming this weekend, 16 of them. I know that's like the most I've ever seen for one weekend. We know that we have an issue with our air quality too. We know that in rural areas people suffer from the stench of the hog confinements. We don't have much public land here. We have the second lowest amount of public land of any state. And we see our young children leave. And I was telling somebody earlier today, I have 3 adult children. They've left, right? They're gone. They're not coming back. 2 of them live in Colorado and 1 lives in California. They want to do outdoor stuff. They want to live in a place where they can know that the place where they're living is not going to cause cancer. And so we, on the one hand here, are not getting the water quality and the environmental outcomes that we want, right? On the other hand, we hear farmers talking about how they can't make any money. The input costs are so high. The fertilizer and the chemical is all stuck behind the Strait of Hormuz because of the war with Iran. They've suffered because of Trump's tariffs, have upset the international commodity markets. We see now that Iowa is the 4th worst state for farm foreclosures right now. We have a record high farmer suicide rate, and so they're not making the money that they want. And so on this hand, farmers, they aren't getting the outcomes that they want. And so we don't get the water quality and the environmental outcomes that we want. At the same time, farmers aren't getting the economic outcomes that they want. And so it begs the question, who is getting the outcomes that they want? You know, why are we doing this? Who's getting what they want out of this system? And I'll tell you who it is. It's these big corporate agribusiness corporations, these ungovernable corporations, multinational corporations. They always get the outcomes that they want, right? They always make money, even when the farmers don't make money. And so with the water quality condition, we always put the onus on the shoulders of the farmers, but we ask corporate agribusiness nothing. We ask nothing of them. And so they come into our state and they extract wealth from our state, from our natural resources here. They're wealth extractors. And then they leave us with the pollution and the cancer, right? And I just think it's time that we talked about this, right? And you look who funds the incumbents' campaigns. Well, it's these big corporate agribusiness corporations that I speak of, and the big agribusiness interests. That is who funds his campaigns. It's not farmers, it's not everyday people, it's the big PACs and the big corporations. And so something needs to change here. And so, you know, the state's approach to this issue with water quality has been incremental, right? And so we want to do it a little bit at a time, not too fast. We don't want to upset things. And I've come to believe, after studying this stuff in my career as a researcher at the University of Iowa, that, you know, incremental change is never going to give us what we want. And because we have this incremental change, people know how to take advantage of it and make money off of it, right? And so people learn how to exploit these government policies targeted toward incremental change, and they get rich off the whole thing. So what we need is systems change here. We need systems change. How do we change the system? And that's what we need to talk about. This system here of a monoculture of corn and soy and the animals in kowtows, and then 70% of our corn going to ethanol. This sort of system here, you cannot find an example of it on planet Earth where it's delivering the water quality outcomes that people want, right? There's no example of this, of producing beneficial environmental outcomes for the public. And so we have to talk about what other systems we could implement here that would give us the outcomes that we want. The first thing we need is we need a diversity of crops on the landscape. And so we cannot get the water quality that we want when we only have 2 species of plants covering 70% of our land. We just know that. These are one of the things that we talk about in studying this stuff, is how can this ever be made to perform environmentally when you only have 2 species? You just can't do it. And so we need a diversity of crops here, a greater assemblage of crops. What would some of those things be? Well, oats is one of the things we always talk about. The United States imports 800 million bushels of oats from Canada every year, and 600 million of those bushels, 600 million out of 800 million, come right here to Iowa. They come right in here to Iowa. They come to the world's biggest oat mill, which is 20 miles from my house in Iowa City in downtown Cedar Rapids. Well, Iowa used to be the #1 oat growing state. We were the top oat growing state for a long time. We could grow oats here. We could grow quality oats here. We have farmers that are growing quality oats in Iowa. And so we need policy that would incentivize a crop like oats, for example. And so this morning we were just at a farm a little bit north of here in Hardin County. A farmer there is growing oats, and so it can be done. We need vegetable and fruit crops here, and so I know that Iowans in the cities have a desperate desire for locally grown fruits and vegetables. And so why don't we do this here? We know we could recruit farmers that want to do this a sort of production system. A lot of these would be younger people. How do we get them into the career? We could set up the infrastructure that we need, the other systems that we need, where we could supply our cities with fresh, locally grown produce and fruits that are not awash in preservatives, to get them here from California or Texas or Chile or Arizona. And so, I think you've all heard we have the second highest cancer rate in Iowa. Well, what's one of the things we think about in trying to prevent cancer? Well, it's eating a healthy diet, right? Of fresh fruits and vegetables. We could do that here. Why don't we do it? We could create policy to get this sort of production in Iowa. It would not take that many acres. Another thing we need is a return of cattle to pasture. And so when we implemented the renewable fuel standard in 2005 that required blending of corn ethanol into basically the entire fuel supply in the country, we lost a lot of our pasture ground, especially in southern and western Iowa. Well, farmers just decided they had a guaranteed market for corn, right? And they decided it was just easier to grow corn than it was to graze cattle and run cattle on this land. And so we have 1 million beef cattle in Iowa right now on feed, what we call it, on feed. So that means they're in a feedlot or they're in some other type of confinement. If we move to a pasture-based system with cow-calf pairs, we know 1 cow-calf pair takes 2.5 acres. If we got our cattle into these humane systems where we're grazing them in the summertime and using forage crops like clover and alfalfa in the wintertime, we could consume about 2.5 to 3 million acres of this corn ground, right? And so there's another pathway here. We can diversify the landscape. Again, growing the forage crops of alfalfa and clovers bring diversity to the landscape. And so there's lots of things we could do here with our land other than corn and soy that would make the system perform in a more environmentally sound way. And so I think trying to transition farmers to these more sustainable and more humane and more resilient systems with public money makes much more sense than what we're doing now, where we sprinkle $1 million here and $1 million there and $1 million over yonder on this Band-Aid conservation that never gives us the water quality at scale that we want. Right? We're spending $100 million on that last thing, and to what effect? Right? It's just essentially another money laundering system here where we're laundering public money through the farmers to pay contractors and whatever to implement this conservation that doesn't deliver the outcomes that we want. So let's get farmers on this other track. Let's create these off ramps. Let's use public money to do that. Naturally, there's going to be farmers that want to stay in the fast lane of corn, soy, and CAFO and ethanol. Well, I think there needs to be a speed limit on the fast lane. And so we need some rules on that. And so there's common sense things we could do to at least shore up a little bit the corn soy system. And so what are those things? Well, we could do things like banning fall tillage. We know that tillage in the fall is a bad practice. We know it increases soil erosion, it increases nutrient loss. Why do we do it? Iowa State has been putting out guidance on fall tillage since the 1980s. It all says one thing: don't do it. Let's restrict that practice. It's universally acknowledged that it's a bad practice, but in this area of the state, drive down the highway in November, you can see tillage all over the place. We could ban the application of manure to snow and frozen ground. We know it's a terrible practice. We know as soon as that snow melts, that manure is off to the races, it's into the stream. Why do we allow that? We need buffers on our perennial streams. We see so many areas of Iowa where we're that are cropped right up to the brink of streams, right? We have about 700,000 acres in Iowa in the 2-year floodplain that are cropped. And so every other year, all the inputs on that ground is gone, right? We know it's going to flood every other year. So all those inputs gone to the Gulf of Mexico. So let's get the crops away from the streams. Let's have setbacks like they have in Minnesota. Minnesota has a law, a 50-foot setback. Let's get farmers out of the floodplain. We are not saving people from starving by farming this high-risk ground. And so let's have some rules and some laws that get crops away from streams. Fall application of anhydrous ammonia. We've known forever it's a bad practice, right? We know that farmers apply more nitrogen to the cornfields when they apply in the fall. Why do they apply more? Because they know they're going to lose more, right? That nitrogen has got to sit there for 6 or 8 months before the corn can use it. So let's tax fall anhydrous. Let's try to disincentivize that activity and that practice to help us get better water quality. Let's return local control for livestock confinements to the counties, right? In the early 2000s, our master matrix laws essentially took a zoning authority away from the counties, and so the county supervisors really have no authority to deny these construction permits, right? And see what happened. We saw an explosion in the hog industry, right, after we took local control away from the counties. So let's give zoning control back to the counties for new livestock construction. So those are some examples of some rules, some common sense rules that we could do that would help shore up this corn soy system. The other thing is, if you regulate the corn soy system, maybe you inspire some of those farmers to go over to the off ramps and say, yeah, I don't want to deal with these regulations. This is a better deal. The state is going to help me transition to this other system. I'm going to do that. And so let's implement some rules here that try to get the behaviors that we want. The last thing I'll talk about here is ethanol. And so about 65% or so of our corn goes to the ethanol plants. You know, that's a huge amount of corn, right? This is the top corn growing state. 60%, 65% of the corn growing to the ethanol plants is a huge number. We know that the demand for liquid fuel in the United States is going to decline. We know that because of the EVs, the emergence of the EVs. I don't know how many of you have heard about these Chinese electric cars that Trump is keeping from coming into the country. They cost $13,000. They're good. If those ever get into the country, people are going to want these things, right? They're going to snap them up. We also see that young people are not driving like the older generations drove. In 1980, we had about 80% of 18-year-olds had driver's licenses. Now that number is 60%. We see these young people now, they get around on these alternative forms of transportation, these battery operated skateboards and scooters and whatever these things are. They look like toys, but you know, that's how young people get around now. And so the decline for liquid fuels is going to, the demand for liquid fuels is going to decline. It's irresponsible for the state to not start talking about this. We have these 8 or 9 million acres here. 1/4 of the state is growing corn for the ethanol plants. So let's start talking about those acres now. You know, how are we going to transition those acres? Because we don't want to be left flat-footed here. We need to talk about this now and figure out what else we can do with those corn acres that are being used for ethanol. And so I gave you some of the ideas already, the pasture, the vegetable crops, the oats and other small grains. Hemp is a crop that we could grow here. We've seen that Rob Sand is open to legalizing cannabis. That's something we could do here on our farms. And so let's get farmers growing high value crops, right? Why do we continue to grow, you know, this sea of corn where farmers are underwater $1 a bushel, right? Underwater $1 a bushel. This activity would not happen, right, without government policy and government subsidy. So let's get some high value crops in here where we can start to nibble away at this sea of corn and sea of soybeans, and that will give us better improvements in water quality than what we're getting now. So everywhere I go, people just like to ask questions, I think, and I always think I should just speak for 5 minutes and then do questions for a half hour, and so if there's a couple questions, I'll take them.
I found it really interesting. Deb O'Brien, who lives near here, Deb and I were talking. I was driving from Belmont back home, and this goddamn crop duster practically mowed down my Mini Cooper. Deb had a similar experience. We don't know what they're spraying. We don't know if they're spraying our tomatoes or whatever. You told me the other day something that blew my mind. You said that the license for these crop dusters is $15 a year.
I fact checked that. It's 25.
So my opponent has a business where he sends drones into the fields.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. There's 14 bureaus in Iowans. That's the Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. One of them is the Pesticide Bureau. And so the Secretary of Agriculture is responsible for enforcing the rules and laws about pesticide application. The reports are legion these days about spraying where it's not supposed to happen. And so we hear all the time about people's oak trees getting killed, fruit trees getting killed, grapevines, vegetable crops, other row crops. You know, believe it or not, most of the complaints about pesticide application are filed by farmers. And so we have these crops now that are weed resistant. The weeds are resistant to Roundup. And so they've gone to the dicamba resistant crops. And so if you're growing dicamba resistant soybeans over here across the road, and over here you have Roundup resistant crops, and the airplane sprays on some of these crops, they're going to die, right? They're going to die. And so as a consequence, farmers file the most complaints on this. Excuse me. We hear quite often that these investigations proceed extremely slowly. It takes time to get idols out there to investigate things. They don't get the lab results back for a year later, and so these things don't get properly investigated. We know a lot of these, again, are aerial applications, and so the guy flies in, you know, sprays stuff, and he's gone, you know, and nobody even knows what happened. We have fish kills that are happening because of this aerial application, especially the fungicides. And so this time of year, the corn is vulnerable to fungus. And so now we have to fly on the fungicides, and these things are toxic to fish. And so almost everybody these days has a story about a crop duster. And so we need some zealous enforcement of the existing rules on pesticide application. That has to happen. But one of the best ways to reduce pesticide application is to reduce the number of acres that need pesticides, right? One of the reasons why we need these fungicides now is because we plant so many corn seeds per acre in a field. And so a lot of you can probably remember driving down the highway like I do, and the corn plants being, this far apart, and now you see them, they're right on top of one another, right? Well, now we have this very dense canopy of plants because of this high seed density. With climate change, it's gotten wetter here, and so now we've created this system where a fungus can grow really readily on these crops. And so, yeah, we got to spray it, right? And I say all the time, if you insist on growing corn and soy from the Missouri River to the Mississippi River, yeah, you're going to need some chemical, right? And so the way out of this is to try to find other crops that are not going to need so much chemical. And so if we can reduce our corn and soy acreage by 25%, we're going to reduce a pesticide application by 25%. The other thing I'll say here is if we're going to recruit farmers and develop farmers to grow fruits and vegetable crops, we can't have this willy-nilly spraying all over the place, right? They need some protection. And so I don't know if you saw the news story last week, the vegetable farmer down in Page County got sprayed. He lost $60,000 worth of produce, right? And so if we're going to go this track and start growing food crops, we need zealous enforcement of the rules. We need to look at this pesticide licensing system that we have. This past week, we released a local foods and foods for schools policy. And one of my ideas here is we would use the licensing system for pesticide application to help fund local foods for schools. Okay, so we have 33,000 pesticide application licenses in Iowa. 33,000 at $25 per year. Well, that's ridiculous. That's minuscule relative to the potential harm that can be caused by the application. So let's try to fund some local foods programs. Let's try to fund food for schools through the pesticide application program. Long answer, but sorry.
John successfully marketed our garlic skates and our garlic to Slim's.
Yeah, great.
You made a bunch of money.
There you go. Yes.
So I have a question about kowtows. My understanding is that the pits have to be emptied twice a year.
Some of them twice a year, but some of them it's only once a year.
Okay. Because I had an incident where a neighbor had shared with me that in, I don't know if it's Hamilton County or whatever, that it has to be emptied twice a year. So you have this push that by law when it has to be emptied, but yet they're applying in the fall. And we had an incident a couple of years ago where we had a hard freeze early and they still needed to get it out of the pit. So they were going, we had a little card at our door, little acreage in the middle of farm fields. And so we had called our friend who was very knowledgeable, and he said, they're going to ask you if they could go ahead and apply it without knifing it in. If it's frozen, they have to knife it in. And sure enough, we called him, and that's what he was asking. We said, no, you need to knife it in. They tried not to. We saw him spraying it. My husband was home on a weekday. They had sprayed it in, and he called him later in the day and said, "Are you going to knife it in?" Oh yeah. And all of a sudden, we had a bunch of tractors out there doing that. But so being a city girl moving to the country, it's been 16 years. I've learned quite a bit about, CAFOs especially, the distance they have to be from a home. I was naive when I had some guy come to our acreage to ask if he could take a measurement, and what they were doing is they were trying to measure where. So, what was one hog confinement with line of sight? Now there are 3, and and it just blows me away. Story County is like they're minimal compared to Hamilton County. I do water testing in 2 rural areas in Hamilton County, and I'm blown away by the number of confinements. So for me, just witnessing and experiencing, it's like there has to be a limit on them. There has to be a moment where we say no more on a state level until we can get our water quality under control.
So Hamilton and Hardin County are 2 counties that have some of the most CAFOs in the state, and so especially hogs in Hardin County, and then chickens in Hamilton County. Hamilton County might have more chickens than any other county in the United States, and so so this is an Achilles heel of the CAFO system. And so you get the construction permit, you're going to have X number of hogs, and then there's an engineering formula that determines how big your pit has to be, whether you're going to apply it, whether you're going to empty it once a year or twice a year. And these pits will fill up faster than what they're designed for. Well, you can ask why. Well, maybe the farmer's overpopulating the CAFO beyond the permit. Maybe there's seepage from the groundwater. Maybe they're using more wash water within the barn, whatever. But when that pit's full, you got to get rid of that stuff, right? It's a hazard to the animals, and it's a hazard to the workers. And so you have to get rid of it. Well, you're not supposed to apply hog manure in the fall until the soil temperature is below 50 degrees. Well, let's say it's a warm day at the end of September. You've got your soybeans harvested. You want to get your pit emptied. It's getting full, and so they apply to DNR for an emergency permit to get rid of it, before they're supposed to. Well, DNR is always going to say yes because, as I said, that material is a hazard to the animals and to the workers. And so this is a vulnerability of the system, of the CAFO system. Now, how can we get away from the CAFO system? Again, I emphasize we need local control for the counties to have the power so they can deny the construction permits in the first place. But the other thing is we need to transition animals out of these CAFOs into more pastoral systems, which is a more benign way of raising these animals. The other thing I will say here is if we're going to get a handle on this nitrate problem, we've got to be able to manage nutrients at the watershed scale. And so we know in these watersheds how many acres of crops are there, how much nitrogen they're going to take. We know how many animals are there. And so some of these counties, especially, or some of these watersheds in northwest Iowa, already have more animals that are excreting more waste than what the crops can absorb. And so why do we continue to have new CAFO permitting in these areas? And so we need to have the power to manage nutrients at the watershed scale. And so that's going to mean laws, right? That's going to mean rules. And so we need that. And so once we're able to do that, then farmers will be inspired to go to these more pastoral and benign livestock production systems. We can do that. It's within our power to do this. And so it's probably a little easier with cattle right now because beef prices are so high, right? And so if we could get more young people into the cattle business, if we could get them access to pasture land, we could get some of these cattle out of feedlots. I think that is a good first step. Hogs will also graze. Okay, we were just at a farm this morning where he's got hogs that are grazing. We can do that, right? It's within our power to do that. This was a farm that sells to Nyman Ranch, which sells the premium pork. And you've heard the talk about Prop 12. I don't know if anybody knows what that is with the pen size that California is requiring for hogs. It's no big deal for a place that's raising hogs for Nyman Ranch. They support Prop 12, right? Because that enables them to have a premium product, and that farmer can grow and raise a high value product on his land. And so consequently, he doesn't need 5,000 hogs to make a go of it. The guy today, he has like 400 hogs, right, on 800 acres of crops and other land, and he's making a go of it with him and his brother and his son on 800 acres, right? And so if we do these sorts of production systems and grow higher value crops, it will improve our water quality, it will improve our farm communities, it'll improve all sorts of other things. Yes?
Yes. Could you speak to what the data centers are going to bring to us as Iowans?
So the data centers, I just don't know, like you, I don't know how this is happening, right? There's almost universal opposition to the data centers. Nobody wants them, and they just seem to, get their way everywhere. And I think the big concern to me is how these companies have gotten control of these local governments, right? And so by the time we hear about the data center, or in a county, the residents hear about it, it's almost already a done deal. They've already talked to the county supervisors or the city council, and it's almost like a point of no return. It's already there, but by the time the residents have heard of it. And so I think we do need a moratorium on data centers. I do think that. And for this reason, if only for this reason, is these companies have gotten control of our local governments. But the water use is a concern, I think. We know in some of these areas that these facilities are going to use a lot of water. Whenever some place is using a lot of water, they have to discharge water, right? Some amount of it. And so there's been no talk about how the water is going to be adulterated within the data center and what could be in the discharge that's going to go, to our streams. We know the electrical use is a big deal, that they're going to use just an enormous amount of electricity, probably drive up electric rates. And so I do agree that there should be a moratorium on the data centers. I just, how much of this is necessary? Well, maybe some of it, I don't know. But I just think the pace with which this is happening is scary to me, just like it is scary to you. And so, again, I think at least temporarily we need a moratorium on these things. Yeah, maybe. Yes?
Can you tell us what the Secretary of Agriculture does?
So the Secretary of Agriculture, as I said, this is the head of the Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship. There's 14 bureaus within IDALS. The legislature has passed laws over the years concerning agriculture and some other things. And so the Secretary of Agriculture is responsible for administering those rules, enforcing the rules that are associated with the 14 bureaus. And so there's more than just agriculture there. Weights and measures is in. There's a tractor again, I guess. Weights and measures is in the Secretary of Agriculture within the Department of Agriculture. And so, if you fill your car up with gas, you see Mike Negg's name there on the gas pump. The Climatology Bureau is within the Department of Agriculture, and so that's another thing that I have an interest in. I think there's been no discussion about climate change as it relates to Iowa agriculture from our state government. If I'm elected, I will change that. I'll have the state climatologist become sort of the voice of climate change adaptation here in Iowa. That's something we don't have now, and so that's the proximate function of the Secretary of Agriculture is to enforce what's in Iowa code relating to those 14 bureaus.
And there's how many secretaries of agriculture in the USA?
So there's 12 Secretary of Agricultures that are elected, all right? Most of them are in southern states. The only other northern state that elects a Secretary of Agriculture is North Dakota. Texas is probably the state that's most famous for their Secretary of Agricultures. Jim Hightower, I don't know if any of you have heard of him. He sort of launched his political career by getting elected Texas Secretary of Agriculture. So there's 12 that are elected. All 12 of them are Republicans right now. And so we're going to change that. We're going to have one Democrat in January. So. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yes.
Okay, you talked a lot about getting young people to farm and to evolve agriculture. Do you have any thoughts on policies for reducing cost of land? Because in my experience, the number one thing young people say of why don't you want to be a farmer is the cost of land and how expensive it is. What are your thoughts on that?
So that's the big issue, right? Getting young people into the business, they got to have access to land. Our farmland here in Iowa oftentimes is more than $20,000 an acre. And so to go into just corn and soy, that's not going to happen, you know, for a young person that wants to farm, because the number of acres that you need is prohibitively large. You're never going to have that much money. So we need to get farmers into smaller farms where they're growing high value crops. How do you do that? Well, look at the land ownership patterns we have in Iowa right now. About 60% of our land is rented, okay? So 60% of our land is owned by somebody that's not farming it. And so who are these people that own farmland, that aren't farming it? Well, a lot of them are widows, right? Farmer widows that are in nursing homes. But we also now have hedge funds that are buying farmland. I've heard now that the Mormon Church is the largest owner of farmland in the state of Iowa. We have, you know, NFL quarterbacks and other investors here coming to buy Iowa farmland. And it's probably no coincidence that the amount of land that's used to grow corn for ethanol is also about the same amount of land that's rented here. And so, you know, we need to cause a disruption here, I think, in terms of the ethanol industry. We also need to look at land ownership here, and how can we inspire some of these owners of land to divest, right? And so I think it's within our power to create policy to do that, and one way is to regulate the pollution. And so let's say, for example, we required cover crops on all rented land in Iowa. That's more than half the land. We could do that, right? It's within our power to do that. Well, right there you have a major water quality improvement project, but you also increase the cost of production on those acres by $30 per acre. And so if you're the owner of that land, of that rented land, you think, geesh, this isn't such a good investment anymore, maybe I should divest it, right? And we should be able to create policy that channels this land into the hands of young farmers, right? There's also programs, lending programs for young farmers that I think need to be expanded, you know, low interest rate loans, this sort of thing. But I would ask you, has this inflation in land prices here, which has happened in lockstep with the amount of ethanol produced in this country, has this inflation of land prices, has it been good for rural Iowa? And I would suggest to you it has not, right? And so we've locked young farmers out from getting into the career. We've entrenched this polluting system here. And, you know, I think this has not been a good thing for rural Iowa. Now, granted, if you're a school superintendent, you know, you don't want to see land prices go down, but we really don't tax farmland very onerously right now. or trucks, right? And so let's look at land ownership here. Let's try to develop policy that gets us the land ownership patterns that we want. But this is a very sensitive subject, I will tell you. So,
what power or ability does the governor have to block any initiatives from your position?
Yeah, good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to it. I think, there's things that can be done within the Department of Agriculture, like the Pesticide Bureau, and how zealously we're going to enforce those rules that I don't think the governor has much say on. And so the rules are on the books. Federal all agencies, sort of have some latitude on how zealously they're going to enforce things, right? We see that especially with the Trump administration. But I think the rules that are on the books that can be enforced, my understanding is the governor has no power to get in front of that. Now, new legislation, new rules, sure, we need the legislature to pass the law, we need the governor to sign it, and so, yes.
Well, we certainly saw that the legislature just got in to block Roxanne, the auditor's office.
Yeah.
Block his power.
So, but that required legislation. So, look, it would not surprise me if I was elected to see a Republican legislature try to pull some shenanigans like that. But hopefully we'd have Rob Sand as governor that would, veto that sort of legislation, especially since it happened to him, right? Well, I hope so, right? And so we have good candidates. Cynthia is only one of them. I travel around and there's some really excellent candidates, Democratic candidates in rural Iowa that are young and enthusiastic, and they're very appealing candidates. And I think, people are sort of tired of this whole thing, right? That's the sense I get. And sure, people are maybe entrenched into certain voting patterns, but I think this is a year for people to get elected in rural Iowa, Democrats to get elected in rural Iowa, and I think it could happen.
I forgot to thank people. Is there
Okay.
anybody you want to thank?
Well, thank you all for coming today. If you've donated money to the campaign, thank you, especially ChrisJonesForIowa.com. You can go there and read about the campaign and read about my policies, and if you're inclined to donate, that's great. I know as Democrats, we cannot sit on the sidelines like Republicans can and wait for billionaires and PACs to donate to the candidates. I think it's got to be great to be a Republican, a rank and file Republican, because you never have to worry about donating money, right? Yeah, well, you would think.
You get a blackness in your eyes, right?
But as Democrats, we don't have that luxury. And so, but I also know that a lot of people don't have the means to donate to political campaigns, right? And it's a risk. It's a risk,
You can knock doors.
You could, so that's where I'm headed. So if you don't have the means,
I'm trying to help.
if you don't have the means, you can volunteer. And so your time is valuable, right? And time is the stuff that life is made of. And so when you volunteer your time, that's special, right? You're giving away a part of your life to do that, and I respect that. And so I'm not one to really pander for money when I do events, but yes, it does cost me money, cost the campaign money to drive over here from Iowa City and everywhere else we go. And so thank you for coming today, and I'll hand it over to Cynthia.
All right. Thank you for being here, Chris. This was a lot of fun. My theory on candidate fundraisers is if they aren't enjoyable, why bother, right? So I want to say a special thank you to the Hamilton County Democrats who are sponsoring today, the Story County Democrats. Maddie was here. There she is. Hey, Maddie. Thank you to Dr. Ann Broderick of Iowa City, who was a sponsor today. John and I have known Ann since John was in medical school with Ann, and Ann married one of John and Ann's professors. They're still married. My dad was a significant donor to my campaign, Alan Uppedahl, and got one more. Oh, Dr. Mark Taylor was a sponsor today, and he doesn't like people very much, so he didn't want to come, but he was willing to give some money. So if you don't like people, just mail me a check, and we'll keep it between us, us and the Campaign and Ethics Board, right? They know all. And that's the nice thing about Iowa. You know, people have been kind of running down Iowa today, as Chris and I have talked about what we'd like to see change in our state. But one of the good things about Iowa is if you run for office, it's an open book. How did you spend your money? Did you get any in-kind gifts? Did you get your husband to donate a bunch of parade candy like my husband did? You know, who gave you money and how much? And it's all public record. So not every state is quite that way. We're also a good state for redistricting. You know, we have an independent board that sets the boundaries. You might notice if you've spent any time in rural Iowa, the rural districts are getting bigger and bigger. And the urban district, Janet Peterson has about 3 square blocks in Beaverdale. So her district gets tinier every year, and the districts I run in get bigger. So thank you so much for all that you do to make Iowa a better place. And together we're gonna switch it up. We're gonna switch it up. This is our year.